1694, Brazil. Deep within the forests of Palmares, smoke rose like a ghost between the trees. Drums thundered not of war, but of freedom. A woman stood at the heart of it all, Dandara, wife, mother, and warrior. Her hands tightened around a spear, her eyes calm before the storm. In a world built on chains, she chose to fight. And in that choice, she became the heartbeat of rebellion. In the middle of the 17th century, Brazil was a land of gold and blood. Ships from across the Atlantic brought thousands of captured Africans to its ports, their names erased, their bodies branded as property. The sugar plantations stretched like white scars across the land, their smoke rising over fields where men and women toiled until their backs broke. Freedom seemed like a myth, something whispered about only in dreams. But deep within the green lungs of Alagoas, hidden by mist and mountains, there was a secret Palmares. A kingdom not built by kings, but by the escaped. Runaway men and women carved it out of the jungle with their bare hands. They built homes from clay and leaves, grew cassava and maize, forged spears from stolen iron. Palmares was more than a refuge. It was a defiance carved into the earth. To outsiders it was a threat. To the people within, it was the first breath after drowning. Somewhere among those trees, a woman named Dandara appeared. No one knew her origin. Some said she came from a plantation near Bahia, others whispered that she was born free in the forest. What everyone agreed on was this: Dandara carried herself like someone who had already died once and returned to fight, her hair coiled like the jungle vines, her eyes sharp as obsidian. She moved with the quiet grace of a predator and spoke with a voice that made others listen. In Palmares, she trained beside men, hunting wild pigs, forging weapons, learning every sound of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs, the silence before an ambush. The forest, like her, refused to be tamed. When Portuguese soldiers attacked nearby settlements, Dandara didn't run. She led others through the hidden trails, striking back in the dark and vanishing like smoke. To those who saw her, she became a symbol, a woman who turned fear into fury. Palmares was not only a village, it was an idea, that freedom was worth more than breath itself. And Dandara was its heartbeat, moving between camps, organizing defenses, ensuring that no one forgot what they were fighting for. At night, as fires flickered and drums echoed through the forest, she whispered to the young, "Never forget the trees are watching. The forest remembers who stands and who kneels." And among those flames, the legend of Dandara began to burn. Dandara was not born into silence. She was forged in it, shaped by centuries of voices that had been silenced before her. In Palmares, she broke that silence wide open. By day, she trained with the warrior's spear, bow, and blade. By night, she taught the women to fight. The same hands that pounded grain and rocked children also learned to aim and strike. She believed that every woman who could hold a weapon could hold her destiny. When men doubted, she answered not with words, but with victory. Her arrows cut through the leaves with precision. Her traps caught invaders before they could see her face. The Portuguese began to call her a phantom, a woman made of smoke and trees. But in truth, Dandara was flesh and unbreakable will. She organized food supplies, coordinated scouts, and taught the young how to disappear into the forest at the first sign of danger. The community depended on her, but she asked for nothing. She did not crave titles or recognition, only survival, only freedom. Her belief was simple. Freedom is not given, it is built, one heartbeat at a time. In a world that demanded obedience, she taught resistance. The women of Palmares looked to her, not as a commander, but as a mirror of what they could become. They learned to move through the trees without sound, to light fires that left no smoke, to speak in glances and gestures. At dawn, they worked the fields. At dusk, they sharpened blades. By night, they prayed not to be spared, but to stay brave. And when the men marched to battle, the women stood beside them, shoulder to shoulder, for Dandara had taught them that courage had no gender, and silence was its own kind of death. In the stillness of the forest, the drums began to change, rhythm no longer a call of fear, but of defiance. The sound carried through the night, echoing from hill to hill. And when people asked, who taught them to fight like that, they answered with one name whispered like fire through the leaves: Dandara. They met not in peace, but in the rhythm of rebellion. Zumbi was already a leader of Palmares, a man whose presence seemed carved from iron and purpose. Dandara met him on the battlefield, when both were covered in dust and sweat, shouting orders that kept others alive. Between them, recognition sparked before words could. Two warriors who understood the same truth. Freedom required sacrifice. Their love was born not from softness, but from shared fire. Zumbi saw in Dandara a strength that equaled his own. She was not a shadow behind him, but a force beside him. Together, they rebuilt villages after raids, taught the young to read the sky, and held councils where every voice mattered. In a time ruled by men with chains and guns, their partnership was a declaration that freedom must also be shared between man and woman. When the night came and the fires dimmed, they spoke of dreams. Dandara imagined a world where their children would not need to hide, where drums would be played openly under the Sunday. Zumbi promised her that as long as Palmares stood, that dream would not die. They had 3 children. The forest was their home, the stars, their ceiling. Between battles, Dandara would braid her children's hair while sharpening blades. She sang lullabies in Kimbundu, a language that carried the memory of lands across the ocean. Sometimes she wept, not from fear, but from the weight of history, the knowledge that she was raising the next generation of warriors in a world that still hunted them. But even in the brief moments of tenderness, danger never slept. Scouts brought news that the Portuguese armies were advancing again. Their drums, louder, crueler, echoed like thunder from the coast. Zumbi gathered his council. Dandara stood beside him, silent but steady. She had been ready for this since the day she picked up her first spear. In the heart of Palmares, 2 flames burned side by side, love and defiance. And as the enemy drew near, they would soon be tested like never before. The war for Palmares was not fought in open fields, but in the veins of the forest. Every hill, every path, every shadow was a weapon. For years, Portuguese and Dutch soldiers descended upon the jungle, trying to crush what they called a nation of rebels. But Palmares did not break. It bled and grew stronger. Dandara became legend during those years. She led ambushes at dawn, where fog swallowed the sound of footsteps. Her warriors moved like ghosts emerging, striking, then fading back into green silence. They attacked supply caravans, cut communication lines, and vanished into ravines before reinforcements could arrive. Portuguese commanders began to fear the night. They spoke of a woman who could command wind and rain, who walked unseen. They called her a sombra da floresta, the shadow of the forest. But Dandara was human, and her greatest power was not mystic, it was will. When food ran out, she led hunting parties. When the wounded filled the huts, she tore her clothes into bandages. When morale fell, she reminded them why they fought, because life without freedom was a slower death. Every victory came with loss, friends buried in silence, children orphaned, villages burned. Yet each time they rebuilt, Dandara was there first to lift a hammer, first to raise the flag of Palmares again. Sometimes, after battle, she walked alone to the river. The moonlight touched her face, streaked with blood and ash. She whispered to the water, "If I must die, let it be standing." Her reflection shimmered on the dark surface, trembling but unbroken. The war was wearing them thin, but her spirit did not fade. In 1694, as the Portuguese forces prepared their final siege with cannons and fire, the people of Palmares gathered behind Dandara and Zumbi once more. The drums began again, louder than ever. This time, they were not the drums of freedom seeking to live. They were the drums of freedom preparing to die. The final war came like a storm. In early 1694, Portuguese forces thousands strong marched toward Palmares, with fire, steel, and promises of annihilation. They were led by Domingos Jorge Velho, a man paid in gold and glory to erase freedom itself. Behind him, artillery wagons groaned through the mud, their cannons ready to tear the forest apart. Zumbi knew what was coming. So did Dandara. The forest that once hid them was now filled with smoke. Villages that had thrived for decades fell one by one. The people of Palmares, men, women, and children, dug trenches, sharpened spears, and prayed that the forest would once again protect them. But this time, the betrayal came from within. Some captured scouts, tortured by the Portuguese, revealed hidden paths and weak points in the defenses. Others, hungry and desperate, were promised freedom, if they guided the soldiers through the maze of the jungle. When the invaders arrived at Macaco, the capital of Palmares, they brought not only guns, but despair. Cannons thundered through the night. Wooden houses burst into flames. Smoke choked the air, mixing with the screams of the wounded. Zumbi led the defense at the center, his face lit by firelight, while Dandara commanded the outskirts where women and elders tried to flee deeper into the forest. She moved like the wind, shouting orders, covering the retreat with her fighters. The Portuguese advanced, step by step, their boots crushing the soil that had once been sacred. At dawn, the walls of Palmares cracked under the bombardment. The enemy flooded in. Dandara fought at the front lines, her spear splintered, her body bruised but unyielding. She saw friends fall beside her and still refused to step back. When the ammunition ran out, she fought with her hands. She disarmed one soldier, turned his blade against him, and moved to the next. Blood and dust clung to her skin. But she knew it was over. Not because she was tired, Dandara never knew exhaustion, but because she could feel the land itself breaking. The home they had built from hope was collapsing. That night, under a crimson sky, she gathered what remained of her warriors and disappeared into the forest. The siege had begun. The end was near. When morning came, silence covered the forest. Palmares was in ruins. Smoke drifted above the ashes like mourning veils. Among the wreckage, Dandara and a handful of survivors hid in a cave, the echoes of battle still ringing in their ears. They had no food, no weapons, no escape. The Portuguese patrols combed the jungle, killing or capturing anyone they found. The prisoners were chained, branded, and sent back to plantations the same hell they had once escaped. Dandara refused that fate. Her body was wounded, her hands bleeding, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. When a scout returned to say that soldiers were closing in, she stood, straightened her back, and faced the others. "They can take our bodies," she said quietly, "but not our will. Freedom does not surrender." The others begged her to flee, to hide, to wait for Zumbi, but Dandara only smiled, a sad, knowing smile. She had seen enough chains in her life. She would never wear them again. When the soldiers arrived, Dandara fought until her last weapon broke. They surrounded her, shouting for her to drop her blade. Instead, she looked up at the sky, the same sky that had watched her fight, love, and build a world from ashes. In that brief silence, she whispered a final prayer to the spirits of Palmares. Then, before they could touch her, she leapt into the abyss, a cliffside that dropped into the heart of the forest. Her body fell, but her defiance did not. Those who saw it said the wind roared louder that day, as if the forest itself was crying out her name. Dandara died free, and in doing so, she ensured that the dream of Palmares of freedom, carved from chains, would never truly die. When Dandara fell, the world of Palmares seemed to fall with her. The survivors who crawled from the burning ruins whispered her name like a prayer. They said the forest had gone still, even the birds stopped singing. For the first time in decades, the drums of freedom were silent. News of Palmares' fall spread quickly across Brazil. The Portuguese declared victory, boasting that the Black Kingdom was no more. Zumbi, still alive and hiding in the forest, refused to believe it. But the truth clawed at him. His wife, his partner, his equal gone. The year that followed was one of ghosts. The jungles that once sheltered laughter now echoed with grief. The people of Palmares scattered, some captured, some disappearing into the wilderness. Smoke from their burnt villages hung for weeks, like the spirit of their homeland refusing to fade. Zumbi fought on. He struck from the shadows, leading small bands of survivors in desperate raids. But the dream they had built, a land of equality and freedom, was crumbling. Dandara had been its heart. Without her, even victory tasted hollow. In November 1695, the betrayal came again. One of his own men, tortured and bribed, revealed his hiding place. Portuguese soldiers ambushed Zumbi's camp at dawn. He was captured after a brutal fight, wounded but still unbroken. They brought him to Recife in chains, the same chains he had sworn to destroy. There, in the public square, they executed him. His head was cut off and displayed on a pike as a warning to all who dreamed of freedom. But the warning became a beacon. Among the enslaved across Brazil, whispers spread like wildfire. Zumbi lives. And with those whispers came another name, spoken more softly, but no less powerful: Dandara. Even in death, they were not defeated. They had shown what no empire could accept, that even in a world built on bondage, free hearts could rise and fight back. At night, around hidden fires, people told the story of Dandara's leap. They said her soul still walked the forest, guarding the lost villages of Palmares. And when thunder rolled over Alagoas, mothers told their children. That is Dandara reminding the world that freedom never dies quietly. For more than 2 centuries, Dandara's name was buried beneath the silence of colonial history. The victors wrote the stories, and they did not write about her. They wrote of Zumbi, brave, defiant, masculine, but of Dandara, they said nothing. She was erased, like so many women who had carried rebellion in their hands. The documents of the Portuguese crown mentioned Palmares only as a den of fugitives. Scholars of later centuries spoke of resistance, but rarely of the woman who had held the line when men fell. Her name survived only in fragments, songs, whispers, and lullabies passed down by women who remembered. In hidden corners of Brazil, enslaved mothers sang to their daughters about a woman who leapt from the cliffs rather than bow. The lyrics changed from region to region, but the spirit remained the same. Dandara had chosen death over chains, and in doing so, she had become immortal. It was not until the 20th century, more than 250 years later, that her story began to return. Historians and poets started searching through oral traditions, piecing together what had been erased. Afro-Brazilian movements, rising against racial oppression, resurrected her name. They painted murals of a woman with a spear, eyes fixed on the horizon. Artists wrote songs titled Dandara Vive, Dandara Lives. Feminists invoked her as a symbol of resistance, not only against slavery but against silence itself. And when her story finally reached the schools, it carried a simple truth. Freedom in Brazil did not have only one face. It had 2, Zumbi and Dandara. Yet Dandara's power was not in comparison, it was in defiance. She represented the unseen, the mothers, the daughters, the nameless who fought and died without recognition. One writer described her perfectly. If Zumbi was the spear, Dandara was the fire that forged it. Today, when historians speak of Palmares, they no longer speak only of battles and kings. They speak of a woman who built a nation in the shadows, taught others to fight, and died unbroken. And in that, Dandara finally took back what had been stolen. Her name, her story, her freedom. Centuries passed. The forest that once hid Palmares grew quiet, and cities rose over the soil watered by the blood of the free. Yet, across Brazil, Dandara's spirit began to return not as myth, but as memory reawakened. In the crowded streets of São Paulo, there is now a street named Rua Dandara. Children walk to school beneath signs carrying her name, though few yet understand the weight behind it. Artists paint her face on concrete walls, a woman with fierce eyes and a red headscarf, standing against a storm. In Alagoas, near the ruins of Palmares, people gather every November to celebrate Dia da Consciência Negra, the Day of Black Consciousness. They light candles, sing in Kimbundu, and beat the same drums that once echoed through the forest. Among them, women with bright scarves chant softly, Dandara não morreu, ela vive na liberdade. Dandara did not die. She lives in freedom. The old songs return, their words reshaped by time, but carrying the same fire. The sound of drums no longer signals war, but remembrance. In schools, her story is now told beside Zumbi's, teaching children that freedom was not a gift, it was carved by hands that refused to tremble. And among the new generation, her name is spoken again with pride. Brazilian feminists and Afro-descendant movements call her the first woman general of their history. To them, she is not just a warrior from the past, but a mirror for the present, a symbol of strength in a world that still demands silence from women. Modern musicians write her into lyrics. Painters capture her leap into freedom as an eternal moment, neither death nor defeat, but transcendence. In 2017, Brazilian currency featured her image beside Palmares, her gaze steady, her posture unbroken. Each year, more people make the pilgrimage to the hills of Serra da Barriga, the last refuge of Palmares, to stand where she once stood. The forest there hums with cicadas, the same music she once heard before battle. Visitors leave flowers, stones, and poems. Some say they can still feel her presence, a whisper among the leaves, a breath in the wind. Because Dandara is no longer a forgotten name, she has become something greater, a part of Brazil's conscience. And every drumbeat, every march for justice, every woman who refuses to kneel, carries her rhythm still. Dandara's story is not just about rebellion, it is about the anatomy of courage. She lived in a world built to erase her, and yet she became unerasable. She turned the tools of survival into weapons of resistance, and she proved that even in bondage, the human spirit can be unconquered. Her death was not a fall. It was a choice, a refusal to be turned into a symbol of defeat. She leapt so that others might remember that dignity does not beg for mercy. And through that leap, she gave freedom a shape, the shape of a woman who would rather vanish into the sky than bow to chains. Dandara's legacy ripples far beyond Palmares. It lives in every voice that dares to speak after centuries of enforced silence. It breathes in every movement that demands equality, every song that defies oppression, every mother who teaches her child that freedom is sacred. If Zumbi was the flame of resistance, Dandara was its enduring echo, the whisper that continues when the drums stop. In her, we see the truth that revolutions are not born only from swords and battles, but from tenderness, from courage, from the simple act of saying no. When night falls over Alagoas, the wind moves through the trees like memory itself. The forest where she once lived and died still hums softly, as if carrying her heartbeat. Those who listen closely say they can hear it, a distant rhythm, deep and steady, like drums under the soil. And they say that if you ever walk those hills and feel a sudden breeze against your face, that is Dandara, reminding you that freedom is not a place, not a word, not a victory. It is a vow. And she kept it.